Hello there. My name is Phil Gussin. I'm the Assistant Director for the Institute on Ethics, Law, and Public Policy at College of the Canyons. In this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain Proposition 50. The information in this video was derived from two nonpartisan sources. The California legislative analysts, they're the ones who send around that booklet before every election explaining the propositions on the ballot, and a website called Ballotpedia, which is a very good nonpartisan source. I encourage you to take a look at it. In this video, I'm going to provide some background information on redistricting because some of our students aren't very familiar with the process of redistricting, followed by information specifically about California. I'll explain what happens if Proposition 50 passes, and then I will give you arguments in favor of Proposition 50, what the supporters say, and arguments against what the opponents say. And then at the very end, I'll explain what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. For those of you who are new to elections, that might surprise you that I'm going to explain what a yes and no vote means. But for those of us who have voted in California before no, sometimes the way these things are phrased, yes means no and no means yes. This time, yes means yes and no means no, but I just want to be clear about that. So, the House of Representatives has 435 members, each of whom represent a congressional district, a boundary that they represent. And the way it works is congressional districts are usually redrawn every 10 years to account for changes in the population, right? From the last census, which was done in 2010, to the most recent one in 2020, people move around within the state, people leave the state, people move into the state. And so when the boundaries are redrawn, they're redrawn in such a way that each congressional district has the same number of people. So California has 52 members of the House of Representatives. Therefore, we have 52 congressional districts. The population of each is more or less the same. This process of redrawing the boundaries is referred to as redistricting. And it's a state function, not a federal one. So after every census, every state in the country does this redistricting process. Now, it used to be that in California, the state legislature, that is the state assembly and the state senate, they used to be the ones who redrew the boundaries when redistricting came around. But in 2008, California voters passed Proposition 11. And Proposition 11 created a 14-member independent redistricting commission. I'm just going to call it the commission past this point. But it created a 14-member commission, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 independents, excuse me, to draw the boundaries for our state assembly and state senate districts. So just districts for our state legislature. And then 2 years later, Proposition 20 was passed, and that gave the commission the authority to redraw congressional districts for the House of Representatives. So that's the status right now. If Proposition 50 passes, what it would do is it would temporarily replace the congressional districts that had been drawn by the commission with maps that were drawn by the state legislature and then approved by Governor Newsom. The legislative maps, the one drawn by the legislature, would be used in the next 3 elections, 2026, the midterm elections, 2028, the next presidential election, in 2030. After the 2030 census, because as I said, they happen every 10 years, the commission would resume drawing congressional districts. Proposition 50 would also add a statement of policy to the California Constitution urging Congress to require all states to adopt independent, nonpartisan redistricting commissions. But it's important to know that this has no effect on federal law whatsoever. It's just a statement of policy. In terms of the fiscal impact of Proposition 50, counties would have a one-time expense of a few $1,000,000 to update their election material, and plus there would be a $200,000 one-time expense for state costs for the same reason. That winds up being less than 1/10 of 1% of the what's in the general fund. So comparatively speaking, it's a very small amount. The arguments in favor of Proposition 50 go as follows. Supporters argue that the proposition is a necessary response to counter the mid-decade partisan redistricting happening in other states, most notably Texas. Their argument is the Texas legislature redrew its boundaries, didn't wait for the next census to increase the likelihood of Republicans retaining control of the House of Representatives in the 2026 midterm elections, right? And they point out that whereas the legislature in Texas didn't submit its new maps to voters, the voters in California get to determine whether to adopt the maps drawn by the state legislature and approved by Governor Newsom. They also point out that after the next census, the commission will return, and the reforms that California adopted in 2008 and 2010 will remain intact. The supporters of this proposition include Governor Newsom, obviously, former President Obama, but former Vice President Kamala Harris. I think every state legislator in the Assembly and the Senate, as well as the House, and a number of organizations that are typically aligned with the Democratic Party. Arguments against Proposition 50 are as follows. Opponents argue that the proposition undermines what California voters chose in 2008 and 2010. As I said before, the state legislatures used to draw the boundaries. The propositions 11 and 20 gave that authority to the commission. They argue that changing congressional maps mid-decade sets a bad precedent that invites gerrymandering. I'll explain what that means in a second, and erodes voter trust in the political system. So gerrymandering is when the boundaries are redrawn in such a way as to benefit one party at the expense of another party. And what they're arguing is this sets a bad precedent. That gerrymandering, what it basically does is it gives political leaders the ability to pick their voters rather than voters having the ability to pick their political leaders. And they also point out many of them oppose what's happening in Texas, but they argue that two wrongs don't make a right. What Texas is doing isn't right. They should wait for the next census. California should do the same thing. So there's the arguments in favor and against. Oh, and opponents of Proposition 50 include former Governor Schwarzenegger, the former Speaker of the House, McCarthy, and then again, I think virtually every Republican in the state legislature, in the Assembly and the Senate, as well as in Congress. And so finally, a yes vote means that you want California to use the legislator-drawn congressional maps in 2026, 2028, and 2030, and that the Citizens Redistricting Commission would resume after the next census. A no vote means that California would keep using the current commission-drawn congressional maps through 2030 until the commission redraws the lines after the next census in 2030. So that's Proposition 50. And this is a special election where there's only one thing on the ballot. So vote.